Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So very good afternoon to all of you, dear participants, respected resource person, sir, Professor Asmer Sahab, the Department of Political Science, Aligarh Muslim University, and dear participants. Announced that for this session, we have Professor Asmer sir as a speaker. So may I request honorable participant Bhavna Singh Madam, who is also working as an assistant professor in the Department of Political Science, Patna University, to introduce our speakers for this session. Thank you. Over to Bhavna Singh Madam.
Thank you, sir. A very warm welcome to Professor Asmer Beg, all the way from Aligarh Muslim University, and all my fellow participants. I, on the behalf of the workshop committee and all the fellow participants, would like to extend my heartiest thanks to Professor Asmer Beg for being there to chair the 7th technical session of this week-long workshop. So before we begin with, I would like to give a brief account about Sir. Professor Asmer Beg teaches political science in the Department of Political Science, Aligarh Muslim University. He is specialized in strategic studies. He also has a keen interest in electoral studies and Muslim politics in India. His work was awarded the Best Dissertation Prize by the American Studies Research Center, Hyderabad in the year 1996. He was to his credit several works which have been published in renowned journals like the Round Table, the Commonwealth Journal of International Affairs, Economic and Political Weekly, Humanities and Social Science Review, Studies in Indian Politics, South Asian Studies, Studies in Islam, Foreign Affairs Reports, and Indian Journal of Politics, and many more. Sir has written one book and edited 3 volumes. Professor Beg was a visiting scholar in Fulbright program at Southern Illinois University in 1999. He is a fellow of Salzburg Global Seminar, Austria. He is on the editorial board of several international journals and has been a referee to quite a few journals. He is also credited with being the coordinator of West Zone Uttar Pradesh for the academic survey conducted by the Center for the Study of Developing Societies. So Sir is here to enlighten us about the challenges of governance in a federal polity. Professor Beg, the session is all yours. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. And thank you. That's the center where we are rather interacting today for having me on this session. Can you hear me? Is it
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Whenever it is a problem, okay. Good morning, Dipender. So whenever there's a problem, just tell me, because in this mode you don't know, when it is being heard or when it is mute. So anyway, so I'm very happy to be with all of you here to be talking about challenges to Indian federalism and what are the problems of governance in a country, in a huge country like India, which is so huge, so diverse, and rather so many varieties are there in India that it is actually a very difficult task to govern this huge country like ours. And therefore, there are some very significant issues, which we quite often come across as far as governance in our country is concerned. There are certain issues which are usually flagged when we talk of challenges of governance. We talk about usually like things like there is an absence of fiscal federalism. All the financial resources are centralized to a great extent. They are in the hands of the central government, and the state governments, or rather units of the federation, have very little say as far as fiscal autonomy is concerned. And that is something very important, because whenever you are doing governance, financial resources are very important. And usually you also might be reading in newspapers and you come across situations whereby state governments, especially those being rather governed by parties in the opposition to the party which is in power at the center, have always been complaining. It's not a new thing. They have always complained that there's a stepmotherly treatment and financial resources are very scarce with the states. And even when they are given, most of the resources are available to governments which are rather of the same party which is in power in center, or they are the allies, and other parties do not get the required amount of resources. So there is a lot of controversy on this, and we come across this quite often. We also come across issues of division of powers, whereby we all know that the division of powers are such whereby the residuary powers are all with the central government. So our federalism is skewed in favor of the central government, where more and more powers are there with the central government, not only in terms of executive powers, but also in terms of legislative powers also. Because although in certain changes or amendments in the constitution, you need ratification of states, but those situations are very few and far between. So usually in rather when legislation is enacted or when amendments to the constitution are enacted, most of the time state governments or state or the union rather units of this union have very little say as far as these legislative powers are concerned, executive powers are concerned, and even in amendment, when amendment powers are concerned. So these are again, very things which are very usually, flat. I would like to talk about some issues which are, to my mind, the most important ones, and where a lot of reform can be made, or there is room for reform. And if reforms are enacted in those areas, it would bring about a very significant change as far as our federal system or federal arrangement is concerned. One such aspect is the office of the governor. We all know that all through these years, and especially in the last couple of decades, with increasing frequency, we see how the office of the governor is used by the party in power at the center to topple governments or to manage governments or to throttle governments in states where parties other than the party in power at the center manage to capture political power. Now, you all know that governor is not someone who is elected by the people. Governor is a nominee of the government at the center who is appointed by the President of India. So there is total control over the governor of the government, because they can nominate anybody, who is with some very basic, rather eligibility criteria, who can be appointed as a governor in a state. But the moment somebody is appointed as a governor, because he is the head of the state administrative system, the office of the governor is used quite often to manipulate situations, to rather to stall things which the government is trying to do, and to rather uh, stall the passage of legislation which the government there wants, and many other things which are done. Now this is something which on which a lot of cases have been rather fought in the Supreme Court. A lot of decisions have been rather given, but still you find that uh, a lot of misuse happens quite often. And that happens because the governor is a person who has very little choice to act independently, because the governor owes her position totally to the party in power in the center. So if you are not listening, you might be removed. Until the time you keep on listening to them, you are there in the office as governor. So therefore what happens that the governor acts as a shield to the power, to the party in power at the center, that actually they are pulling the strings from behind the scenes, but it is the governor who is visible. So all the flack is heaped on the governor, all the bad things are said about the governor, but actually the governor is being used only as a mask. He's just there as a front, and actually the strings are being pulled by the party in power, at the center, which actually is holding or wielding political power, and which actually manipulates the situation. So that makes the all power goes to the party in power at the center, but the accountability is not with them. The accountability falls on the shoulders of the governor. We all criticize the governor, and he is actually made into some kind of a villain who rather has to answer a lot of questions. And sometimes when things get too much out of hand, you find that the governor is sometimes even rather removed, and Am I audible? Can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes, yes.
Actually, there was
Sorry,
some
please, sir.
yes.
Okay.
Yes, what I was saying that usually, the villain of the piece turns out to be the governor, but actually the villain is the party in power at the center. So there, something can be done here, whereby, because everything cannot be written down in law. There are certain things which we need to understand as a democratic nation, that when you have power, there is some kind of responsibility also which comes with power, and that is something which has to be, which no constitution can instill in you. It is something which you need to understand. So when some political party captures power at the center, it's one party or it's a coalition government, then they have to act responsibly. Now, no constitution can force a government to act responsibly. It is the government which needs to understand that it is supposed to do in a certain situation where it has so much of powers, and how it has to restrain itself, even if there is all temptation to intervene, to topple a government, of another party which is there in power, to manipulate things, to rather scuttle the government formation, or all kinds of things which are being done. So that is something which needs to be understood by our political class. It is not something which you can always write down in law. You cannot always make technical qualifications and technical rather gatekeeping, and ensure that if law is amended in a certain manner, then people will start behaving responsibly, or political power wielders at the center would not rather tend to misuse their power and not manipulate the office of the governor. It is not like that. It is something which one needs to understand. And the problem is that in politics, when political parties capture power, they tend to forget most of these things. They tend to be so rather so much. There's the arrogance of power is there. It cuts across all party lines, and therefore you tend to misuse things, or misuse that power which you have, and that is something which creates problems subsequently. And therefore the other political party, once they get the chance, they do the same thing, and therefore a vicious circle starts. So that is something which we need to understand as a people, and that is something which the common people of the country also need to understand, because when governments are doing these things, we take them as something routine. Ordinary people are not appalled at these things, that we voted for a certain government in a state, we gave them the mandate, they are supposed to take political power, or they are supposed to govern us for the next 5 years, but somebody comes in, an outside player by the name of governor, and he plays some tricks, and the government is toppled, or some kind of buying and selling takes place outside the house, and the government is toppled, and some other government comes in, and people generally are not appalled. People generally do not punish the people who indulge in these kinds of actions, and therefore different governments with the all through time have been doing that with impunity. They know that maybe the people will not take it badly, but if the people of the country, ordinary people of the country, the voters in these elections, if they decide to take these things seriously, or they are rather offended by these kinds of unconstitutional, immoral actions on the part of certain wielders of political power, then people would be rather a bit resistant, or rather hesitant, sorry, in doing these kinds of things. So therefore, when certain wrong things become the norm in the polity, and people do not get offended by these things, that gives an additional license to the government to misuse power. And this is a very classic case in point. So if the people start taking it rather badly, or they get offended, or they get annoyed, and they decide to punish anybody who tends to overturn their mandate. They have given mandate to a certain party, and somebody comes in and plays certain tricks and overturns that mandate. So the people decide that next time we are going to punish them, and they start doing that. So what will happen, that any governor or any government at the center, or any other constitutional authority in the country, would think twice before misusing their powers, or rather acting wrongly with the powers which they have been given by the constitution. So that is something which we need to understand as a people. So it's not only that reforms need to come in the political parties, or the bigger political parties who are the players at the central level and the state levels, but it's the people of India. Because eventually in any polity, especially in a federal polity, the people of the country hold the strings. So we need to understand that we are the real wielders of power. We are the real people, who in whose name everything is being done. And we choose our governments. And if the governments at any level in the state level or the central government are misusing their powers, or they are rather actually exceeding their limits, we are there to punish them. And next time we are probably going to elect somebody else and so on. So that is something, which needs to come in. And that will come in only with the political maturity. Because unless the people of the country are so conscious of these things, they understand, their responsibilities as a citizen. Because if we start behaving like subjects, that whatever is happening, it's the government which we have chosen. So for 5 years, whatever the government does, it's their choice, to act in whatever way they want. We are not there to say anything. That is not the right kind of a thing. We as people need to understand that on a daily basis, every day, we are there to check the government. It does not, I'm not trying to suggest that we should not let the government do what it is supposed to do. Of course, the government is elected and the government is supposed to run the country or the administration of the country, but the people have to be vigilant here. They have to see what the government is doing. And if at any point of time they see that the government is overstepping, they are there to apply the brakes. So that is how a democratic system operates. So in a democratic system, a lot of responsibility is on the people. They have to be eternally vigilant and see that any wielders of political power are not exceeding the limits. And more so in a federal polity where you have to see that the weaker units, units are relatively weaker, as we just now discussed, as compared to the central government. So we have to be their guardians. We have to be there to see whether the federal government is trampling on the powers, on the autonomy of the units. And whenever that situation seems to be happening, we are supposed to raise our voice. That is something which we need to do. And therefore, if we start acting in that responsible manner, you would find that all officers, be it the governor, be it the chief minister, or any office, they are all, or the central government, they would all understand that what are their defined constitutional limits and how they are supposed to operate within those limits. And they should not, or they cannot play games with the people, because the people are very vigilant. They understand situations. And if we try to cross our limits, the people are there to punish us according to the democratic system which is there in the country. The other important thing which I would like to flag is the issue of regionalism. Now, this is something, which is very very important as far as the strength of our country is concerned. As I mentioned in the very beginning, that India is a diverse country. We have all kinds of diversities in the country. And these regions of the country, in the north, in the south, in the east, in the west, and within those regions, there are diversities and rather variations of diversities. We have so many languages. There are 22 constitutionally approved languages. There are all kinds of cultural groups and all kinds of uniqueness which these people have. But what happens is that we quite often see that there are certain groups which are relatively powerful in terms of their spread in the country, in terms of their presence in the country, in terms of their being in certain areas which are rather politically more salient and important. They tend to dominate over the system. So therefore, what happens is that there are certain regions or certain areas in the country which feel marginalized. Marginalized because they think or they feel, and sometimes rightly so, that their due is not being given to them. They are not being properly even heard. They are not being given proper, understanding, as far as the scheme of things at the national level are concerned, because the bigger areas or the more politically salient areas dominate. For example, I come from UP, the Hindi heartland. So the feeling in different regions of the country is that it is the Hindi heartland which dominates the politics of the country. So because they are geographically very big, and Politically, they are very important because 80 seats of the Lok Sabha come from UP, and then 50 plus seats coming from Bihar. So these are the areas, which send the maximum number of members to the Lok Sabha. So there are more representatives from these areas, and therefore political parties also give more importance to these areas in terms of listening to what the grievances of people are here and what the people say and so on. And therefore, there are certain issues which people in these areas take to be very important, generally, for example. So therefore, what happens that the people living in other regions of the country are sometimes forced to listen to these issues as the issues of the country. For example, all through we have seen there has been a lot of conflict on the issue of language. So what happens that people living in other areas, for example, people living in Assam or living in other northeastern states or in the southern part of the country, there is a feeling that people from this rather Hindi heartland want that Hindi should be imposed on other regions. So there is a feeling of of linguistic rather chauvinism, or a linguistic oppression which is coming from the Hindi heartland area. And therefore, people belonging to other linguistic groups feel marginalized. They feel that their languages are not getting their due place in the scheme of things, although these languages are also constitutionally approved languages and they find mention in the Constitution of India. What to talk of other languages which are smaller languages spoken by a relatively less number of people and they do not find mention in the Constitution, they are even more marginalized. So therefore, what happens that there is this feeling of of being pushed to the margins. And when people in these areas in like states like UP and Bihar and this northern states, people here generally feel that our language is the language of the country. So everybody should accept that. Because we find that everybody is speaking this language, so other regions of the country should not have any problem in accepting it. So we are looking at this issue from a perspective whereby we assume that this is the language of the country. This is the national language, and other people, if they are having any objection to accepting this language as the language of the country, they are creating problems in the path of national integration. They are actually the problem creators. So therefore, what happens that in our obsession with our own language and in our understanding that this is the language of the country, we tend to be quite often, treading on the steps of people in other regions and rather sometimes advertently and sometimes inadvertently pushing their languages to the margins. So what we are doing is that we are making other people, apprehensive, fearful sometimes, and we don't even feel it because we think that this is common sense. Everybody should accept this language. So therefore, what happens, and we are not even conscious of the finer diversities, which people have all across the country. I'm talking of people living in my area, in the northern part of the country, in this Hindi heartland. So quite often when people will talk about, rather say, regions in the south, so South India is not one, neither geographically, nor culturally, nor linguistically, but people here would say that X is coming from South India, as if Tamil and Malayalam and Telugu and Kannada, they are the same language. He's South Indian. If so, is he speaking some language, people will say it's a South Indian language. Or if somebody comes from the Northeast, all the Northeast 10 people are bracketed in one single category. Because we don't know the finer distinctions and sometimes we are not even interested to know it. So that is the mindset which people have quite often, and it is not always advertent, but it creates problems, it creates apprehensions, it creates fears, it creates divisions, and it is something which is not good for a federal polity, whereby all regions, all units need to have their place under the sun. They should all feel equally included. They should all feel that they are getting their due in the system. But the way the system operates, at the functional level, quite often we find the marginalization which happens with people, and they are not given, or they do not get the kind of, rather place which they are supposed to get in the system, usual. So that is something, which is, of course, many people in my part of the country would not even rather appreciate this issue, but this is one issue I think which is very important and which is rather a major obstacle in the path of national integration, of bringing people together. Sometimes, we are all very sincere in bringing people together, but we don't have that required sensitivity to the concerns of people living in other regions, to their linguistic concerns, to their regional concerns, to their cultural concerns, to their existential concerns. And because of that, we are not able to bring them together, because you need to be large-hearted enough. You need to be inclusive enough to let people from all regions of the country, from all diversities of the country to come together. But for that, a very conducive situation needs to be created. And I feel that especially people living in the northern part of the country, in this, especially in this central India, the northern part, UP, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan and Bihar, they have more responsibility in terms of creating that conducive environment whereby people from all parts of the country can feel more included, more involved. And that can only happen when we actually have that kind of a knowledge about people elsewhere. Because generally what happens that people in our part of the country would not even, as I mentioned earlier, would not even know, what kind of diversity exists in the country. What are the different, languages which are there in the country? What are the cultural differences? And we don't even appreciate that. So that is something, which we need to appreciate and understand. Now, the other important thing is that these are as I mentioned, language, there are 2, 3 other isms which are a problem as far as rather governing a country like India is concerned, or bringing people all from this huge country together is, and that is the problem of, language, the problem of region, the problem of religion, and the problem of, any kind of, even caste, these are the isms, which are creating basic obstacles in the path of people coming together. And they happen because of a certain, a misunderstanding about the different identities we have, as far as, these different regions are concerned, or rather about these different linguistic groups are concerned, or different religious groups in the country are concerned. And what is this here? Basically, if I were to look at people, in general, what happens that we all have our identities. For example, we have our gender identity. Somebody is a male, somebody could be a female. We have our religious identity also. Somebody could be a Muslim, a Hindu, a Sikh, a Christian, so on. You could be one could be having a regional identity also, that I come from Assam, you come from Bihar, somebody comes from Kerala, somebody comes from UP. There could be linguistic identity also. I speak Hindi, you speak Urdu, somebody speaks Marathi, Telugu, Assamese, so on. There could be a caste identity, that I could be a Dalit, you could be a Brahmin, somebody could be something, and so on. So these are the different identities which we all have. Now, you can't escape these identities. They are there. Fine. There's nothing wrong with them. The problem starts when we start being so very exclusive about our understanding of these identities that we start feeling that our identity is the most important identity. Fine, to that's fine. But the problematic thing is that my identity is the most important, and I will do service to people of my identity by being very exclusive and by rejecting inclusivism. So what happens that, for example, as I was just now talking about language, that if I'm talking about my regional identity, so I will think that my regional identity is the most important identity. Fine. And I think that the best service to my regional identity would be that I would be rather having a very negative or exclusive understanding about other regional identities. Means other regional identities don't matter. I don't care about them. I only care about my regional identity and people belonging to or upholding the same regional identity as I do. So what happens? Only my identity is good. Other identities are all not to be accepted or rejected or whatever you might say. So that exclusivism creates a situation which is called as regionalism. So region is good, regional identity is good, but the moment that becomes, exclusive, it turns into regionalism. And what does regionalism give you? It fosters a feeling of antipathy or hatred or even animosity or at least apathy towards people upholding other regional identities. Means I'm only concerned about my regional identity and go to hell for other people. I don't care about people belonging to the other regional identity, but rather I don't approve of that identity. So that turns into regionalism. So regional identity is natural. Having affinity with people belonging to upholding the same identity as yours is very nice. You live in Assam, and people who are from Assam, if you love them more, or you are more affectionate towards them, you like them, it's very nice. But you have no right, or you should not be rather having an animosity to people coming from other regions. You should not discriminate against people coming from other religions. You should not look down upon people coming from other regions. You should allow them to uphold their identities, their own identities, and let the thousand flowers bloom. Why should I be having an animosity against people belonging to the other or upholding other regional identities? But I would do that because I'm influenced by the virus of regionalism. Similarly, religion. Religious identity is natural. Anybody is born in any religion. Usually in India, we have religion by birth. Very few people change their faiths in the course of their lives. Fine. All religions are good. All religions preach the same basic values, and all religions have the same good values. If you reduce them to the basic values, you would find that all religions are talking about the same basic values: love, brotherhood, humanity, and honesty, and all kinds of basic universal good human values. Fine. So what is wrong in my religion, rather my following a particular religion and you're following a particular religion, and why it creates problems when we both are upholding the same good values? Now, what is the paradoxical or rather interesting thing here? The interesting thing here is that in India, we all say that we are religious people. And all our religions teach us good things. So technically, we all should be very nice human beings, because majority of the people in India would identify themselves as religious. So we are all religious people belonging to different religious denominations, and we all have good values in our religions which we have been taught. So we all should be very nice people living with each other with amity, with love and affection and all kinds of goodness. But that does not happen. There's a lot of rather conflict in the name of religion. There is not a lot of violence even in the name of religion. We even go to the extent of killing people in the name of religion, or even caste. Why it happens? When all these rather religions teach us good things, it happens because of our misplaced love and affection for our religion and people belonging to our religion. And that love I would call as obsession. You are all mature people and you all understand that when love turns into obsession, it becomes very dangerous. So till the time you are loving someone, it's fine. But when that love turns into obsession, it breeds hatred. You all know, we quite often come across these things in newspapers where you read a story that a boy was in love with a girl, and when the girl spurned his advances and was not ready to marry him, he killed that girl or threw acid on the face of that girl. Now, we usually read it as a normal news, but if you go into it, you'll find how strange it is. I loved someone so much. And once that person was, rather, I couldn't marry that girl, or something rather intervened in between, I went to the extent of killing that person whom I loved so much. So how that love turned into hatred, that extreme love turned into extreme hatred, because extremes are always dangerous. So that love changed into obsession. And when I became so obsessive for someone, that obsession bred a kind of hatred that if I can't get that person in my life, that person should be killed or acid should be thrown on her face. So easily, my love changed into hatred, because it became obsessive, it became so possessive, it became so exclusive. So that is what happens in religiosity. When our religiosity becomes so obsessive, it turns into hatred. And what happens that we start thinking, or some of us start thinking, that we are good, and only people who profess my faith are good, others are all bad. And therefore, that narrow or blind love, for my religion or my co-religionists makes me a hater of other religions or some other religion. And that makes it easy for me to perpetrate rather violence on people belonging to the other religion, or even to go to the extent of killing those people. And I'm not apologetic about it. Similarly, that boy who killed his girlfriend was not apologetic. We are not apologetic. A lot of people here even celebrate that. So when you do violence in the name of caste, or many people do violence in the name of caste, do violence in the name of region, or do violence in the name of religion, they are proud about it. They are not apologetic. Even if some court holds them accountable and they are even punished, but they are not accountable. They are saying that we did something great, because that is a service which we did to our religion. So that is something, which, rather we should not be ashamed about it. It is something which is very normal, and we should rather go about it very normally. So therefore, what happens, that this is something which is so dangerous, that it rather affects, the whole polity. Because you can just imagine a situation where a large section of the population has this warped sense of religiosity, which actually we know by the name of communalism. So religion, which is such a pious, holy, nice thing, has turned into such a dangerous thing in certain situations in our polity, whereby people tend to even resort to violence in the name of religion. So therefore, what happens, that caste, which is something very natural, very obvious, region is something very, you can't choose, you were born in a certain area, language, which is very natural, you were born in Assam, so you speak Assamese, I was born in Kerala, so I speak Malayalam, and religion, which is also something which is an accident of birth, have turned into such vicious things like casteism, linguism, regionalism, and communalism. So this is something, which is so very dangerous and which is polluting our polity no end. Now the next question, which is a very important question, actually, these are the issues which are more important. We were till now talking only about the things which are quite apparent in our system. What we need to understand is the reasons why these things happen. That is very important. To my mind, the most important thing which we need to understand is politics. Politics is a very misunderstood term in our system. Many of us who are not students of social sciences tend to quite often feel that politics is something which is very bad. And therefore, whenever we have to think or talk about anything which is bad about our system, we immediately use the word politics. That this is wrong because of politics, that is wrong because of politics. I think that is a wrong understanding of the term. because politics has negative sides to it, fine. But there is a certain very positive side to politics as well. Politics is also constructive. Politics actually is life here. Whatever we do from morning till evening, all of us, which affects the lives of other human beings is politics. So actually we are all into politics. Did you get my point? We are all into politics because right from morning till evening, we do certain things outside our house. When we get out of our homes in the morning, we do something or the other. Somebody is a teacher, somebody is an auto driver, somebody is a minister, somebody is an engineer, doctor. We are doing things which affect lives of other human beings. So whatever we do affecting the lives of other human beings is politics. So we are all into politics. So therefore, to suggest that people who are our elected representatives are the only people who are into politics, and we actually have nothing to do with that, and we are rather very nice people, and we have rather no responsibility to whatever is happening in the country. That is something which is a very limited understanding of politics. So politics is something which includes all of us. We are all responsible for whatever is wrong. The only difference is that you could be slightly less responsible and I could be more responsible because maybe you are a teacher or a doctor or an engineer whose actions are affecting a limited number of people. And maybe I'm a minister whose actions affect relatively larger number of people. So the only difference is in scale. But there is rather no difference in the basic rather effect which people have on lives of others, and therefore we are all into politics. Now, since we are all into politics, therefore what happens that we are here talking of actions which are advertent, deliberate. I'm not talking of some mistakes which can happen with anybody. I'm talking of deliberate actions. I'll give you a few examples to illustrate. For example, I'm an engineer and I'm there to build a bridge. So I know how a bridge is to be built, but because of certain considerations, I would compromise on quality, I would compromise on the cement used, and I will build a bridge which is not going to last very long. I know that. And unfortunately, some accident happens. So for the people, it is an accident, but I knew that that accident might happen because the quality has been compromised. So this is a deliberate action. On the other side, I could have done something very good also. I could have built a very nice bridge because the money was available, the resources were there. I could have used the best material, the best technique, the best cement, and the bridge would be as sturdy as many bridges in our country are. So the point is that whatever happened, it was very deliberate. So if something good happened, that was also deliberate on my part at least. And if something unfortunate happened, I actually am responsible for that. It is not a mistake, it is very deliberate. So therefore, what happens when in politics, we are talking of these deliberate actions. So deliberately, one is doing wrong things. For example, when we are going to vote, I and you are going to vote, we are deliberately voting for the wrong person. Why? We are deliberately voting for the wrong person because if, for example, I am voting for a criminal, known criminal, I know that person is not a good person, but because of the regional consideration or sometimes the caste consideration or the religious consideration or some other negative consideration, I vote for that person. So what happens? The wrong person gets elected eventually, because many other people are thinking like me. So therefore, what happens that gives support to the phenomena of communalism in the society, or similar such action will give support to the phenomena of casteism in the society or regionalism in the society and so on. So therefore what happens that we are deliberately doing the wrong thing and deliberately making the wrong choice because we are affected by the viruses, the main viruses here, either casteism, communalism, regionalism or linguism or maybe corruption and so on. So these are the viruses which affect us and therefore consequently we tend to do the wrong thing. Now, the next question is that why are we rather so easily affected by viruses like these? Why it is that that we are so easily, tempted to be communal or casteist or regional or so on. What is the problem? There are many problems, but I'll flag a few.
Hello, sir. You are not audible. Participants are requested to wait for a while. We are trying to contact him.
Dear participants, due to some network issues, sir is unable to continue. Please, we have to wait for a few minutes. He will again try to join. Please wait. Don't leave the group. Sir will join shortly.
Because it was. Is it audible now? Fine now. Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, sir. You are audible now.
Yes. So I was saying that this prioritization of identity is such whereby we actually are not able to, understand that basically our identity as an Indian is a rational identity. All other identities are non-rational identities.
Like, for example, your regional identity is non-rational. Your caste identity is non-rational. Your religious identity is non-rational. Only your national identity or your Indian identity is rational. Now, how it is so? It is so because, as I mentioned earlier, that if I believe that my religion is the best, because when I am influenced by that religious identity, to the level of obsession, and I start thinking that my religion is the best and others are no good. So therefore, what happens that I start believing that my religion is the best. Now, when I say it is non-rational understanding, because there is no scientific evidence in the world which tells you that your or my religion is better than the other. It's a matter of faith. There is no scientific evidence to that. So therefore, when we start acting affected by that thinking of communalism, all our decisions are bound to be non-rational. For example, when I'm going to vote for someone in the name of religion, it can be only an accident sometimes that the person turns out to be good, because I'm not voting for his merit, I'm voting for his religious identity. And that is a very non-rational decision. Similarly, I am voting for a person's regional identity or a caste identity or so on. So therefore, eventually what happens that we are all generally being guided by a non-rational consideration whenever we are being rather influenced by these isms, regionalism, linguism, casteism, or regionalism, whatever. But suppose your main identity is the Indian identity. So the Indian identity is a rational identity, because when you are thinking that you are going to do something for your country, then of course, you are going to do the best thing. So suppose if I were to select some person in an interview, there are 5 people in front of me and I am guided by the national identity, I will look for the best person. Somebody who is guided by the regional identity would look for a person coming from his region. Somebody who is mainly guided by the communal identity will look for a person from his religion. Or somebody who is guided by the caste identity would probably search for a person from his caste, or similarly, somebody would search for a person from his linguistic group. But once you are having that national identity as your primary identity, now the problem is that how that identity becomes the primary identity. That is a process of political development. When we reach to that point of political development, where many countries in the world have reached to a great extent, there what happens that they are able to shed their other identities or put them on the back burner and foreground their national identity. That is something, which we in India need to do. Of course, we'll be able to do, let's hope, in due course, but till now we have not been able to do that. And quite often these non-rational identities come to the fore, which make us decide, in different matters, and therefore we make the wrong decisions quite often. Wrong decisions means they are non-rational decisions. They are not made based on any rational consideration. So therefore, what is required is that once your identity or the identity formation becomes rather, or the prioritization of one's identity becomes rather perfect to a great extent, we are bound to, or we would be led to making the rational decisions, and therefore, that is something which would be right. Now, the other problem is for us, because of which, we do the wrong things quite often, or we make the wrong decision, or we are affected by these viruses, is the way, we live in a situation which is defined by the politics of scarcity. We live in a society or in a country where things or resources are quite often scarce. And when resources are scarce, what happens? That you tend to rather run for resources. You tend to rather have a lot of competition for these resources. And quite often you think or we feel that those resources still would escape us. So therefore we tend to search for shortcuts. And it is here, when the political parties in our country come as interventionists who are there to sell us shortcuts. So the basic problems which we face in our polity, in the governance of our polity, are problems which are basically precipitated by these political parties whom I call as middlemen, who are conscious of our insecurities in terms of material resources in our society, and who exploit these insecurities by feeding us with all kinds of non-rational considerations and selling us shortcuts which are basically not really shortcuts, but which give us a lot of psychological satisfaction, and therefore we tend to be swayed by their emotive appeals. So what happens in our country basically is that political parties, instead of promising us material benefits, offer us emotional benefits quite often. And these emotional benefits are in the form of casteism, communalism, regionalism, linguism. So these are the things which are in our society, but which are, to a great extent, these problems are aggravated by these political actors because they know the insecurities which people in the country have. And they know that the resources in the country are scarce. So these insecurities, material insecurities, cannot be satisfied very easily. So what they do is that they sell us shortcuts. And the shortcuts are sold to us in the form of capsules which are sugar coated. And the sugar coating is either communalism, casteism, regionalism, or linguism, which sugarcoats their offers to us and which makes it very attractive to us. So what happens that we are easily swayed towards them. We are easily attracted towards them because they are so very attractive. And how they are offered to us, I'll give you a few examples. For example, you belong to a particular caste group in your state. Some political leader comes in and says that, of course, he doesn't say that, but what does he mean is that the resources are scarce, so everybody cannot get those resources. But I will give reservation to your group, because he understands that if your caste group and maybe a few others vote for him or his party, they're going to win the elections. So they will say, we'll give you reservations. Reservations are shortcuts, which they are offering you. And you are immediately swayed because you know that in the usual course, maybe you and your children would not be able to get all the resources of the state. But if that shortcut is available, you will easily get those things. So even if your group is not very backward, you are economically very prosperous, you don't need reservations. But the moment I offer you, you think that it is a very nice thing, and you are very obliged to me and you say, I'm a very good leader, and you all follow me. You are not able to look at my sinister motive. I'm not trying to help you because you don't need help. Maybe other people need more help more than you. But I'm trying to attract you towards something and thereby get your votes and win the elections. But eventually what I did was that I created a disturbance in the system whereby I gave certain facilities to people who are not deserving of those facilities, and thereby I created a caste divide in the society by playing with the caste identities of people and thereby vitiating the social atmosphere of the country. Similarly, communalism, regionalism, or linguism. So therefore what happens that these political parties actually know that these problems cannot be solved so easily. So they give you those emotive satisfiers which are only in the form of emotions. They will not give you anything materially. They are just trying to placate your caste identity or your religious identity sometime, or your regional identity sometimes, or your caste identity sometimes, and play with your emotions and get your votes. They are not interested in doing anything rather constructive in general. And thereby, they create a big problem for the system, for the governance of the system, because they are actually aggravating these problems of casteism, communalism. Hello? Hello? Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Achha, can you hear me? Yes. So what
Yeah.
I was saying was that this is a situation which rather vitiates the whole atmosphere of the country. And people usually, they are not able to rather look beyond the appearance, of these things, because they find these offers, which are very attractive, which are coming from political players, political parties, and this is something, which keeps on, rather.
This meeting is being recorded.
I'll join with that. With the,
Hello.
Yes, sir. Yes, yes.
Yes, so I just wanted to switch from my phone to this screen because that is easier. So therefore, what happens that, a certain kind of competitive politics starts in the country whereby different political parties are competing for these emotive issues. So what happens that the real issues of the country are relegated in the background. Nobody sincerely is talking about, say, poverty. Nobody is sincerely talking about education, health, housing, realistic issues, real life issues which concern the people, because they know that they are very difficult issues and they're very difficult to resolve these issues because of the huge population in the country and the scarcity of resources. So the easiest thing is to switch to these emotive issues, which are known as pseudo issues, or which is known as pseudo politics. So political parties tend to be playing the pseudo politics in the pseudo political arena, thereby ignoring the real political arena and the real political issues, and thereby misleading the people and vitiating the atmosphere of the country. So that is something, which is very dangerous, and that is the reason, why in a country like India, these issues get so much of traction in. The moment any political parties try to play with your religious identity or your regional identity or your caste identity or your linguistic identity, there is a lot of traction. Immediately the response is there, and you are seeing these issues being played out sometimes violently in many parts of the country at the moment, because they are very attractive issues for the people. That is something, which is there inside you. There is a raw nerve, and the moment they scratch the surface, you come out in support, and that creates a very tricky situation for the country. So that is the reason, because of which in a third world country like India, these conflicts, these divisive things are getting so much of traction, and they do not get that kind of attraction in countries which are economically well off. So suppose in a country like, in a European country, of course, these issues are there, but at much less, lesser intensity as they are in India, because those countries they are post-material societies. The economic situation is not so bad, resources are not so scarce, and people in those countries are living in a situation which is characterized as politics of plenty. So people are not so hard pressed for resources. So therefore, if somebody comes in and talks about such kind of emotive issues, the traction is very little, and that is very temporary also. So there is always a temptation for politicians to talk of emotive issues because they don't need to do anything in emotive matters. There is no investment, you just need to be a good demagogue, make good speeches, play with the emotions of people, and get your votes. But that is something which works very well in third world countries. So either you look at India or Pakistan or Bangladesh or Sri Lanka or any other third world country, all these issues are playing up in different forms, but they are basically emotive issues which politicians take up, and they get a lot of support and traction, once they are taking up these issues. So to my mind, that is the biggest problem which the governance in our country has to face in the times to come. And that is something, to which we as citizens also need to be alive. We need to understand. We need to look at the reality, behind the surface, with which political parties are trying to play with our emotions. And we need to be cautious enough, and we need to understand, and try to be able to play our role as responsible citizens of the country. I'll stop here to take your questions, because if I keep on speaking, that's not the right thing to do. So I'll take your questions now.
Thank you so much, sir, for such an insightful session. The best part of the entire presentation was how vocally you spoke about various wrongdoings and misuse of power done by the government. You've also made us understand that people are the supreme power in the federal polity. So it's high time we start acting as citizens and not as subjects. Thank you, sir, for providing such a detailed view on how regionalism and linguistic dominance can pose a challenge to the federal polity. So now the session is open for question round. Anybody can put on their question in the chat box. So there is already one question put on by Kunjalata Brahma Bharti, and she has given her statement first that she strongly believes and have understood that identity is fluid, and this fluidity is also a result of cultural assimilation. But again, can this be negotiated or create future issues if religion and language adapt to a vicious turn of events, keeping in mind the ongoing discourse and political narrative? I would like to repeat the question again. I think it's too long. So she has said that she strongly believes that she has understood that identity is fluid, and this fluidity is also a result of cultural assimilation. But again, can this be negotiated or create future issue if religion and language adapts to vicious turn of events, keeping in mind the ongoing discourse and political narrative?
Ma'am, it is not negotiated, it is negated.
Okay, yeah, negated.
Yeah, sorry.
Yes. So what I would like to say is that actually, assimilation or people coming together or a synthesis of cultures and languages and groups, that is happening. That is natural, and that has been happening in the country for a long time. But because of certain vested interests, different political players tend to rather create a discourse in the country, and not now, that's been going on for a long time. Sometimes it gets very aggravated or rather it's very obvious, and that is something which rather creates obstacles in the part of that assimilative process, and that is something which is the danger. And as I mentioned, this emotive politics is something which is so rewarding for these political players, and that's why they tend to rather do that, and that is what is the danger for the times to come.
Thank you, sir. Any more questions?
Ma'am, if I'm allowed to ask a question directly here.
Yes,
Professor Beg, sir, good afternoon. This was my question that I had put forth. I just wanted to ask again, sir, like what you said that, the ongoing, identity crisis and whatever happens, it serves the, the ongoing political narrative and all. But then again, it caters or it profits the political discourse that is happening. But isn't it also leading to some kind of an erosion of the already existing structure as the constitution sanctions or validates in a lot of ways and also?
Yes, to some extent, yes. I agree to what you are saying. There are, of course, there is no one process which is at work. I just highlighted one aspect, but as you would very well appreciate, that there are so many, processes at work at the same time in such a huge and diverse country like ours. So it's not that there is one single discourse which is all pervasive and all things are progressing in that direction. I was just trying to highlight that particular aspect, but of course I agree what you are saying. That's right. Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
দিদি মানুহৰ ওপৰলৈ উঠিব লাগিব যে পুণ্য ফোন নাম্বাৰে নাই মোৰ মাতিবা নেকি নিৰা পুণ্যক এবাৰ ফোন এটা মাৰাচোন সমৰমত আহক কি আহক সমৰমলে এবাৰ
मैडम प्लीज स्विच ऑफ योर माइक
मैंने पहले चला रखा तो
स्विच ऑफ योर माइक
दो अलीगढ़ में कोई काम डिपार्टमेंट में आप नहीं कर सकते आज मैं बिजी था तो मैंने सोचा कि कभी नहीं करता हूँ यहाँ
Hello, Bhavna ma'am, can I put one question to Beg sir? Hello, am I audible?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am,
go
you
ahead.
can, you can.
Okay. Good afternoon, sir. Hello.
Yes, you are audible.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, sir. So I had this question. I'm a bit confused with the question as well, but I wanted some clarification on it. That could federalism be the real solution of Northeast India's problem of insurgency, or could federalism be a valid question to resolve the vexed problem of political violence in the region?